Amen. So,
Hey, are you gonna blow a shofar?
what's that?
Are you gonna blow a shofar?
Not this morning. I didn't bring a shofar with me here to Flagstaff. Does anyone have one in your environment?
I have one, but I couldn't blow it.
I have one.
Your husband was the master.
Yes.
Let me go get one.
He
Let me go
loved
get
it.
it.
Steve's got us both. Here we go.
Yeah,
I have one.
He's getting one.
You want me to go get mine?
Sure.
Okay.
We'll take it. Who else has got a shofar?
I do.
Did you want to blow it for us, Terry?
No.
No.
That would involve walking from here to the other side of the house. And
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
I got a
No.
chauffeur. He's not driving this morning, though.
that's right.
So we read last week a commentary on the opening letter of the book of Genesis, of the Torah, Bereshit. We should look forward. We talked about Elohim as being the universal God. We read that very sweet teaching about Aleph and Tav, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. The first thing God created was et, Aleph to Tav, the Hebrew alphabet. And we also looked at a discussion about why we needn't be concerned about any disparity or disconnect between science and Genesis, and coming to understand that the Torah is not purporting to be a science book. It has other ideas behind it. So we're moving on now to the Women's Torah commentary. I see Mary Purcell here. I think she's the only one who is new to us. For anyone else who has never been with us for Torah study? Okay, good. So hopefully you all know how to access all of the handouts. I did email them out again this week. And also just a reminder that because we are blessed with more than one screen of participants, if you would like to get my attention, if you have something you want to add to the conversation, you want to put a note in the chat in case I don't see your hand waving. So the Women's Torah commentary, I'm not quite sure when it was published, maybe 10 years or so ago. One of the joys of Torah study, as we participated in this group, is that many of us have different commentaries, so we're able to share different perspectives. And Steve says, I didn't get the link this week, but I still had it from last week. Steve, are you referring to the link for this Zoom? Because the link doesn't change from week to week.
No, I thought you said you were sending a link for the documents and so forth.
I send a link for the handouts, and I can put those together and send them to everyone right now.
Yeah, I still have them from last time, unless there's something.
Oh yeah, no, there's nothing new. That should be good. Here we go. Here's the whole folder. Oh well, I guess well, here's the main thing. There's the handouts, and then there was some supplementary material as well. But the Women's Torah commentary, which is what we're looking for, is in here. And I'm going to share it as well.
Yay.
There we go. So if everyone can see that. Terry, you said yay, so you get to start reading.
Oh. Who are we? The question is answered. You figured this out, but let me know. The question is answered in the first portion of Genesis as follows. We are God's prized creation, inhabited world that God has made. We are a constellation of 4 relationships, with the earth from whence we came and whither we return, with each other as women and men equally blessed and jointly commissioned to care for the world, with the animal world toward which, can you slide that up a little bit? Toward the animal world,
Toward which we have responsibility.
and with God in whose image we are made and whose breath animates us. Human disobedience complicates the relationships but does not destroy them. Genesis 1 emphasizes the power of language and the reality of goodness. Humankind is embedded in a larger world over which God reigns supreme, but within which human beings can and do play a unique, decisive role. A wide-angle lens that encompasses a whole world in Genesis 1 is augmented in Genesis 2 to 3 with a zoom lens that discloses an up-close and personal relationship with God. The split-screen view characterizes the Torah as a whole and introduces a biblical practice of offering more than one perspective on important events. The turbulent narratives
The subsequent,
through Genesis.
although they may be turbulent also.
Boy, that one just slipped into the brain. The subsequent narratives through Genesis 11 continue to respond to universal human questions about origins. They account for human suffering
Can you see
and
that?
inequality while affirming the sovereignty of a God who deeply cares for the world and his creatures. Continue.
Well, I'm gonna pick it up from there.
Okay.
Thank you. Genesis 1 to 11 depicts God as still discovering the qualities of the material at hand, humankind, and reassessing its potential. Despite repeated disappointments, God remains faithful and hopeful, adjusting expectations and offering humankind new tools and guidance. The Parsha concludes at a nadir with God's disappointment in humankind when violence corrupts goodness. However, the text also makes clear the possibility of renewal despite decline, a theme throughout the Bible. Goodness and connectedness persist. No biblical story has had more influence on women's lives and identity, and none has been more often reinterpreted through later cultural biases than the creation of woman in Genesis 2 and the expulsion from the garden in Genesis 3. The version of creation of humankind in 1:26 to 28, which portrays equality between the sexes and their shared reflection of God's image, is typically overlooked in favor of the more ambiguous one in Genesis 2, which is typically read as one in which man precedes woman in time. Consequently, the first woman has been cast by later interpreters as an afterthought, second and therefore secondary in value, not essential to God's plan. She has also been held solely or at least primarily responsible for human suffering. However, a close reading of Genesis 1 to 3 indicates that such misreadings overlook the context and nuances of the depiction of woman. Suffice it to say here that the first woman is depicted as a discerning, responsible person who, despite transgression in Genesis 3, maintains a creative partnership with both God and the first man. She is rightly recognized by her man as a source of life. Other named women make cameo appearances, Ada, Zillah, and Naamah. The Parsha concludes with a mysterious account about the illegitimate seizing of women, a prelude to the flood story that will follow, see at 6:1 to 8. So that's an introduction to the entire Parsha, of course, not all of which occurs in the first chapter, which is our primary focus. So some of the concepts that emerge from this understanding are this idea that, first of all, we need to note that there are actually two stories about the creation of humanity. In the story that we have in Genesis 1:1, God created the human, male and female, God created them. So man and woman created simultaneously and equally. And when we get to Genesis chapter 2, we'll see the more familiar story as the Women's Bible Commentary pointed out, of Adam being created first. He goes to sleep, God takes the rib, and Eve is created from God's rib as a helpmate to God. And we'll talk about what does that mean, this idea of Eve or a woman as being a helpmate to God. There's very much in this first chapter of Genesis, as we will see, a sense of primacy of human beings. So the human being is created as the pinnacle of creation and given the job of, depending how you translate the verb, of watching over, or could be understood as conquering the creation. So how we as human beings relate to the environment is very much up for discussion in this chapter. Clearly, it is a vegetarian society. So the idea of meat eating, as we'll see, does not enter the Torah until after Noah and the flood and God's acceptance of the evil that's inherent in our nature. Meat eating becomes a concession, and then kashrut becomes a further control on our desire to eat meat. But the vision of paradise that we're going to read here in these next couple of chapters is very much of a vegetarian society. Human disobedience, the Tamar writes, complicates these relationships, but does not destroy them. So her reading of these opening chapters depicts God as really having a very optimistic view of human nature and human potential, despite our failure to make good choices, which is so interesting to read as we're in these final weeks right before Rosh Hashanah and coming to terms with each of our own Yetzer Hara and doing Teshuvah. And we saw last week that Teshuvah was, if you saw that Midrash, Teshuvah, I'll put it up for those who may have missed it. Teshuvah was one of the things that was created before the creation of the world. So there was an expectation of failure built into the foundation of the universe, which is kind of comforting to know that we were not designed to be perfect. There was no expectation that we were going to be perfect. Teshuvah was already there before the world was even created. Let's see. So how does the Midrash reconcile? So from this perspective of biblical scholarship, why do we have these two different versions of the creation story? Well, you know, we have the documentary hypothesis, which talks about J, E, P, and D, that there are four basic sources which were woven together by R, the redactor, to make the Torah as we have it now. So J is the source that refers to God as Yud He Vav He, which is the specific name that the Israelite people used to call God, whereas the E source, Elohim, is the more universal God, the God of creation. P is the priestly code. Some of us spent a lot of time with the primary text of the P source, which is in Leviticus, but also sprinkled throughout the rest of the Torah. And D, Deuteronomy, is seen as a separate vision. And then R is the redactor who put it all together. So it's known as the documentary hypothesis, because it hypothesizes these four documents that are all brought together to give us our Torah. So this is the scholarly answer about why we have two different versions of the creation of humanity, because one came from the J source and one came from the E source. And then the question becomes, so why didn't the redactor edit out the inconsistencies in the text? You would think that if you are crafting a text that's to be seen as one unified whole, that you would do some editing to reconcile where these differences are. But the answer is that each of these documents already had a quasi-canonical status. They were already considered to be sacred, and therefore you couldn't touch them or change them. So they were woven together. So the text we're going to read in Genesis 1 has a male and female created as one being, and then the second story that we'll see in Genesis 2. I want to say something about also this idea of male and female. So very much this binary gender concept. But again, those of you who were with us in Leviticus can, or if you weren't, you can go back and look at the URL where we have our old handouts collected up. We'll remember that as the tradition develops into the Talmud, what did we see? There were at least 7 different gender identities that the rabbis, even by the time of the Talmud, had identified. So the tradition does evolve beyond this male and female, God created them.
And it obviously also devolves.
Yeah. So, you know, it seems, it's interesting that the writer uses and instead of or, if that's the Hebrew and.
Where are you looking?
You know, that God creates all us as male and female instead of male or female. So, so it would seem to imply that we are made in the image of God, that each of us is male, contains male and female in the image of God.
Yes, beautiful.
Instead of an or there.
Right.
Bravo.
Yeah, very nice. So we're gonna see, let's see, I think we're gonna look at the Women's Torah commentary on the concept of Tahom, that the Spirit of God was hovering above Tahom, and we'll see that Tahom is etymologically drawn from Tiamat, which was the ancient Babylonian female goddess. And in the Babylonian creation story, the heavens and the earth were created by cutting Tiamat's body in half, and half became the heaven and half became the earth. And we still see a remnant of that in the use of this term Tahom for the unformed and void, chaotic, pre-existent matter from which the creation was made. So,
Rabbi, excuse me.
yeah.
Everybody has 2 hormones in us, the estrogen and testosterone.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit of more in the male, not maybe, but a lot more in the male than the female. But this is, I think, very insightful.
Yes. I'm glad you think so.
Well, I mean, you know, that we are both male and female.
Right.
Do we have a sense of when the second approach became the prevalent approach? That
Yeah, my guess, it's not something I've looked into specifically, but what makes sense to me, Sherry, is that as Christianity evolves the concept of original sin, that second story comes to the fore, because in that story you have Adam created first, and then Eve, and then we'll see the garden and the snake and the fruit of the tree, which, by the way, there's no reference to an apple in the Torah. It's just a fruit, a good-looking fruit that seduces them in the garden. So I think that idea of original sin becomes so profoundly important in Christianity that the focus becomes on that story. But I did read a Christian feminist commentary on that story, which kind of turns it on its head and says, you know, Eve gets all the blame for being the one who, you know, succumbed to the temptation of the snake and brought evil into the world and created this original sin from then, you know, which we all need to be cleansed and purified. And yet there's, I can't remember her name, this commentator says, but wait a minute, Eve was the one who was curious. Eve was the one who was attracted to the tree in the first place, who was interested in knowing good from evil. Adam was just like, you know, oblivious, you know, lived to enjoy the garden and was in blissful ignorance. But, you know, without Eve, it's not that she brought original sin, it's that she brought us back to our essence as human beings, to have a sense of curiosity and choice and knowledge of good and evil, without which we wouldn't truly.
Adam was off playing golf.
Yeah.
I was wondering if he was throwing things like rocks in the river.
Sure.
You know,
Poisoning.
inventing bombs.
Try to skip along the puddles.
Barry Kipnis.
It might not be totally appropriate, but I'm reminded of the expression that winners write history. And the reality was that religion and the writing of religious tracts and control was in the man. So it's pretty, not obvious, but it's not illogical for man to have a predominant role and blame all the ills on women. And you're right. Adam was hiding in his man cave drinking beer.
Right.
Fermented pomegranate juice. Barry, I think that the extra blood is really upping your output here in Torah.
I think a lot of that fruit in the Garden of Eden fermented is what happened.
Yeah.
So any other responses to the women's Torah commentary? Yes, David.
Well, I think the Torah commentaries in general are a little problematic, but I'm not seeing anything about Lilith really floating through here.
Yes. So
Yeah,
thank you very much.
If you take her into account, it puts a whole different spin on what we've been talking about.
All right, good. So let's talk about Lilith here. So this is another way that, thank you for reminding me, that the rabbis have of reconciling these two distinct sources, and it's quite interesting. So the rabbis, this is a classic midrash, that the rabbis say that the woman, the female who was created in Genesis chapter 1, our chapter that we're looking at here, was named Lilith. So it was Adam and Lilith were the first couple, Lilith in Hebrew. And the first night, sundown, on the first day, they're getting ready to go to bed, and they had an argument about who was gonna be on top. And Adam said, I'm the man, I should be on top. And Lilith said, says who? And in the Midrash, the suggestion is that Lilith at that point flew away and became a demon. And talk about demonizing women, what's like the most unfeminine thing that the rabbis could think about as the most unfeminine attribute. Lilith became the demon who was responsible for infant mortality. So Lilith goes around the world killing newborn babies because, this image of an uppity female who would dare to argue with Adam and not take her rightful subservient place was so intensely threatening that they made her like the anti-female, that she's going around killing babies. And some of you may have grown up in homes where the practice was to tie a red thread around the crib of a newborn baby. Anybody ever see that practice? Myra is familiar with that. That was to ward off Lilith. So yes, David.
But if you follow that thinking, I'm not sure if the organization's still in effect. The magazine Lilith
I think they
was around women's rights and taking back. And some of the midrashes indicate that Lilith got a bad rap, and there were attempts to, shall we say, rehabilitate her over the centuries, but it's never really caught on completely. So, but the thing that I found the most interesting part of the whole was, who said? The question was, who said? And that makes an assumption that starts this whole fight from night one.
But it wasn't God that said it, it was some man.
But in the Torah, if it's written by God, who said it?
God said that Lilith was the devil, or
Lilith
whatever.
does not appear in the Torah. Lilith is in the Midrash, which is a folkloric commentary on the Torah. The only thing we read is male and female, God created them.
So Lilith is apocryphal.
Well, I would say midrashic. There is
That ironical.
the Apocrypha is a specific collection of texts, and Lilith doesn't appear in the Apocrypha. So I would, to be more precise, I think I would say a midrashic.
Okay. And I would say that she exists in almost every culture. There is some form of Lilith to explain away. These creations come about because primitive peoples were trying to explain away things that happened in nature,
right,
that they couldn't explain. It was either the devil made me do it, or she was taken over by a bad spirit, or Lilith came and got her, and we can't explain it, and it takes all the blame away from the victims of these problems and gives some place to put the anger and frustration.
Yes,
and reminds me of the Chupaca, and there's another one in Mexican and Central American folklore, the woman. Can anybody remember? Who comes and takes babies?
Llorona.
Really?
Yeah, she lost hers and she comes for others.
The answer to that question, but I feel that what woman wants to lose their child? Even an unwanted pregnancy ends up with a woman who feels bad, I think, giving her child away or whatever. Very few.
I think that's our normative expectation, and true in most cases, but not all.
Yeah.
It seems that that kind of story really emphasizes the importance of fertility and having lots of children in the ancient world. That the idea that you would take a child or destroy a child would be the highest evil in a society where having lots of children was so important because of the high infant and maternal mortality.
Right.
Just as a point of information, it's La Llorona, if I'm pronouncing it badly.
Llorona. Llorona.
Yeah.
Llorona. That she kidnaps wandering children at night, mistaking them for her own. And she begs God in heaven for forgiveness, but to get to heaven, she needs to find her children. So she's looking for her own children, a little bit different than the demon figure.
But a twist the theme. It explains away. It explains away children, stillbirths, all the things.
So, you know, we've talked before, I think, about the fact that in the Jewish laws of mourning, you don't sit Shiva for a child who dies at less than 30 days of age. And the reason for that was because infant mortality was so much the norm that there was this idea of don't get too attached to that kid until you see that they're gonna, that they have a chance of surviving. And that's dictated by living at least 1 month. And that's something, you know, now in contemporary culture, it's been a big change, especially as women have entered the rabbinate in the last 30 or 40 years. And as medicine has advanced to the point where we have the expectation that you're going to get pregnant, you're going to have a healthy child, and that child is going to survive to adulthood. That's a very contemporary way of looking at childbirth. And now women have helped bring a little bit more sensitivity to the tradition to say, you know what, if you've ever been pregnant, I can personally remember by about 8 weeks of pregnancy, my body had undergone all kinds of changes. I was very, very aware of that pregnancy way before I was showing, way before the baby began to move. And if I had had a miscarriage at that point, there would have been a real sense of loss. I was already attached to the idea of that child, even after just a very few short weeks. So, so now not only do we, God forbid, mourn a child who dies within the first month, but there also are many ceremonies that have been created by women rabbis to mourn the loss of a miscarriage, recognizing that as a real spiritual crisis that can and should be commemorated with some ritual. So I want to make sure everybody saw Robin's comment in the chat. She said she's adopted and that they noted in the files that her birth mother had zero emotion for her. Ooh. So Robin, we're very glad that you found a loving home, but it does speak to that generalization that, you know, if we think that every single woman who has a child is going to go on to be a loving, caring mom, that's a false hope, as it were. Robin, did you want to say anything more about that?
Sure. I mean, I don't begrudge her at all. She was 16. And he was 15 when I was born, so they were babies. I was completely an unwanted pregnancy. And, you know, the fact that she didn't abort me and gave me up for adoption, I'm grateful, you know. So, and, you know, I'm grateful we have a society to be able to have a system for adoption, you know, that there is choices. So. But yeah, no, it was interesting to get the adoption records and read in her handwriting.
Wow.
You know, what was going on. Yeah, yeah.
That gives me goosebumps even as I'm sitting with the sun on my back.
Yeah, it's easy to talk about now, not so much when I was getting those papers in my hand.
I can't really imagine what that would be like to see, but it sounds like you've processed it in a way that you've come to peace with it.
Yeah.
Other responses to the Women's Torah commentary before we move a little bit forward. I wanted to just point out a term in biblical scholarship. It is in the chat called a merism. A merism is just a good term to know. It's a term that has two aspects to it, but is meant to be all inclusive. So that's the term used for heaven and earth. For example, here in this text, that is a merism. God created heaven.
Wait a minute, wait, time out. It
Yes.
says in the chat that it begins with an M. Are you saying a merism or a
Yes.
merism?
No, a merism.
Thank you.
Yes. So if Barry Singer is like on it fast. He's He's already looking up the definition of
Now, I couldn't see the chat bar, so I had to move the gallery down to the side.
Okay, good.
There's the word merism, and it is a merism, as in one, or is it?
The term is merism with an M.
That's what I was asking. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
What language is that?
English.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so a merism is something that has two parts, but meant like, let's say maybe, from head to toe would be a merism. It includes the whole body. So heaven and earth. I just wanted to point out that it doesn't literally mean heaven and earth. It means heaven and earth and everything in between. And
going back to what Lisa pointed out earlier, the conjunction and, perhaps that's the way we should think of man and woman.
Yes, man and woman and everything in between. Yes, we could understand that as a merism from the perspective of Lisa's comment. Yes, very nice.
So, you want a definition of merism?
Yes, please.
Merism is a linguistic phenomena in which combination of two contrasting parts of the whole refer to the whole. For example, in order to say that someone searched everywhere, one could use the merism searched high and low.
There you go. I like that. Good. Thank you. Very helpful.
I've never heard that word before.
Well, aren't you glad you stopped by?
There you go.
So that is English. I'm gonna share with you another very interesting term that let me see, how do you spell this? Okay, abracadabra. Anybody know the origin of abracadabra?
No, but it sounds like cadaver.
Yeah, abracadabra. So the term used in magic, like boom, so something magical happened, abracadabra, I waved my magic wand. So this is actually Aramaic, and it comes from this creation story, Abra. You can see in there how that has the word Bereshit in that root. Abra, I will create. Dabra, ledaber is to speak.
Wow.
So abracadabra is I will create as I speak. That's the magic that God is performing. Abracadabra, and there was the universe.
Where did you dig that up?
It's like magic.
Yeah, it's like magic.
No, seriously, where did you find that bit of?
I don't know. It's
it's
just
we know these things.
fun. Yeah. It's magic. It's abracadabra. She found it.
You know how that some things waited be creation? This kind of knowledge is known to rabbis before they're born.
So it does speak, though, to the homiletic takeaway of this whole creation story, which is that as God creates the world through speech, so we each create our world through our use of speech. And again, as we're looking at this over the holidays, we can be reflecting on the comfort and the pain that we can create in the world by the words that we use. So abracadabra is not only God, it's us. We can create and we can also destroy. Yes, Myra.
We also create good and evil in our minds. If we think good things, I think good things, you perceive that good things have been happening. If you think bad things, you perceive that bad things are happening. It's all your perception.
Attitude is huge. I'm gonna just find something real fast on attitude. A quote that I love that does speak about the importance of attitude. Just stand by 1 second.
While you're looking, may I say that this coronavirus has been a godsend for me because I learned how to use Zoom and all this other stuff.
Okay, so I was going to attribute it to Bertrand Russell, but I'm wrong. It's Charles Swindoll. So, Myra, can you read us quote 302 there? Can you see that on your screen?
Yes, I can. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It is more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes. It is more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a synagogue, a home. The remarkable thing is that we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it.
So is that an essential summary of what you were saying?
Yes, because I believe God has given me certain things, hardships, shall I say, and I could have laid down and let the bus roll over me, or I can say, why did God give this to me? What am I going to do about it? And react from there.
Good.
Very interesting.
Other thoughts on Lilith, Merism, or Abracadabra? Before we move on to one more topic I'd love if we could cover today. I'm just going to look at both my screens.
Hi.
Yes, Sarah Lee.
You know, what is it? Is it innate in some people that have a positive attitude and some people just never can develop that they always look at the glass as being half empty rather than half full? Is that something that can change in a person?
Well, we have a couple of subject matter experts on this, so I'm going to let Felix and Owen field that question.
I think that it's hard for people to change. Attitude is an essential component of how you grow up, but I do believe that's how relationships work out. That's how people get to know each other. In difficult times and easy times, nobody has the same idea about everything. So if you look at a relationship, a marriage, an organization that has figured out how to make it work, that's because they actively engaged in changing their attitudes in one way or another. So I think it is possible. I think it has to be conscious, though, an intentional act.
Felix, you want to add to that?
Well, I very basically agree with Owen. I think he put it beautifully. I would just say that I don't believe we're born one way or another, but our experience has the predominant force in forming whether we're pessimistic, optimistic, skeptical, cynical, however however the different forms of attitude might be conceptualized. Experience has a lot to do with it, and it certainly can be changed, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of time, and yes. So
It's like
most
a light bulb.
most times people won't subject themselves
So
to the process
Myra,
that is needed.
yeah.
Yeah,
Myra is asking the essential nature versus nurture question.
right.
So, and you're coming down very firmly on the side of nurture.
Me too.
Yes, yes.
If I may say something, that puts a lot of pressure on parents with a newborn. You know, how they're going to behave with that child seems to have a lot of influence. My grandfather used to say with a newborn, from dus we need to machen a mensch.
You have to make a man
Yeah,
out.
absolutely. I saw a few other hands. Terry,
I was just agreeing with the nurture. I mean, I've been in education from literally birth to high school, end of high school, and I can vouch for the fact that nurture is got to be predominant, because there are ways to shape even an unpleasant disposition into a much more and a softer being. But it takes work and recognition and knowledge and all the understanding of teachers. Teachers typically do a better job than some parents do, because they have the training to go in there and work at it, and they're not working 24/7. But there is, no, I'll leave it there.
All right.
Like the old light bulb joke. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb's really got to want to change.
Yeah.
Mom, my mom's gonna tell you about how how I was growing up, I guess.
Ooh, fire away.
Sandy?
Well,
Mom, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
She's muted.
Oh, you got to unmute, Mom.
I'm sorry. Sometimes having a positive attitude is even not a good thing. If you're so positive, you can't see somebody else's problem and you're not sensitive. It's great to have a positive attitude, but you also have to have sensitivity.
So she's talking about her sister, who is, am I right? Who is Miss Mary Sunshine, and it's wonderful to always be able to see things from a positive perspective. But you bring up a good point that that can lead to a lack of empathy if you are unable to understand a person from their perspective and the pain they're experiencing, and want to kind of invalidate their pain by imposing your Gamzu Latova, this too is for the good kind of an attitude.
I'm curious what Merle has to say. She keeps on raising her hand.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Well, I think that in a lot of this with positive and negative attitudes in a lot of relationships, and even a lot of with kids growing up, is that there has to be a element of learning how to compromise. And in order to make both sides work together.
Yeah, you're going back to nurture.
Yeah.
Willa, yeah.
Well, I have a question. Taking all of this into account, I think nature and nurture and all of that had to do with it. But for Felix, if a person is depressed, would that fit into the whole picture?
Well, it relates, but depression is such a complex and complicated concept. There are all different kinds of depression. And yes, in the older literature, there was a term called endogenous depression, which explicitly defined the person's depression as given genetically or at birth. But
I always understood that as being metabolic.
or some sort of biological result. What I would like to just maybe add to this conversation is that there are very few things that science has confirmed as being genetically or given at birth. The closest thing to attitude that I can think of that is generally considered to be given at birth is temperament, which is different. But of course, depending on how you deal with the baby's temperament can result in a mensch or a cranky kid. I mean, you have to, okay, let me just leave it there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Since I'm in the world of like babies and grandchildren right now, it's definitely the case that a newborn infant, you have some that come out and they appear to be very content and they sleep well and they eat well, and then there are others that are colicky and cry and just need a lot more soothing. So what you're suggesting is that
pass a lot of gas.
Yeah, there is a certain that's an okay reality. So what you're suggesting is that the temperament is there, but it is shaped into the nature by how we respond to the temperament. Where's Mary Purcell? Mary,
exactly.
Mary, are you there? I see.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you just weigh in from your perspective? Mary is our preschool director, so she is really in the trenches of observing children's
God bless.
how personality is formed. So what do you think? Nature, nurture, both? What's your takeaway?
That is such a loaded question. I think, I'm not a psychologist, but I think that there's a component, there's both. I think you might be born to be more empathetic. It might be something that you have to work toward. Like some people have to work towards being very sensitive and empathetic, but other people have to really work hard to do that, So I think there is a nature component where you do have certain skill sets that allow you to, grow. And I think that I feel like there is some nature in there too, because you have 3 children that you could raise similarly, but they all take a different perspective or have a different view on what that was. But I think you also, due to your nature, relate to people on a certain level, which causes greater connections or less connections, and then could cause you to feel a certain way,
If you walk into a room of 18-month-olds, so they're old enough that they're walking around, they're playing with toys, I would guess that you find kids who are like, mine, and there are kids who just their nature is, oh, here, I want to share it.
Yes. Yeah, or you take a toy someone comes up and takes a toy. One child might want to be aggressive and bite that child or scream and cry, and one child kind of will look, if you observe them, they'll look and then think, okay, and move on to the next thing. But some people don't react that way, So I think it's also just how we, due to our nature, how we react to certain situations can be an impact.
But going back to Felix's original comment, I just want to emphasize that our tradition strongly suggests that we have the capability to change. If we didn't have that capability to change, then it would remove from us the element of choice, which is fundamentally what these early narratives of Genesis are all about, to bring us back to the text. We did eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that created an obligation within us to make the choice to do good or bad, to be held accountable for those choices. And this whole high holiday season is about us looking within, looking at the choices that we've made and seeing where, why, and how we want and need to grow and change direction in the coming year. Yes, Felix.
There's one other issue that I think would help us put this into perspective. There is one category, or I could say a diagnostic label that relates to a certain kind of person that no one has ever discovered a way of helping or changing them, and that is the psychopath.
Yes.
And it's been shown that on functional MRIs and ways to really study the brain and how the brain works and lights up under condition, that their brains are actually different from everyone else's brain. I don't understand the details of all that work, but it is said that the best psychotherapy for a psychopath only results in the psychopath learning how to be a better psychopath. So very different from sociopath. Please don't confuse those two. And just know that this is widely held in the profession of psychology and psychiatry, that nothing can change a psychopath.
And that's just some kind of a genetic phenomenon that occurs in the brain?
In the brain, yeah.
That's just remarkable. It really begs the question. So what happens when the kid gets to be 10 and 11 years old and is exhibiting those psychopathic tendencies? How do we as a society
younger than that?
If we really, maybe 5 or 6, who knows, maybe 3.
The best answer that we have as a society is 24/7 supervision or containment. So to minimize the harm or hurt that person can do to other persons.
It speaks to the concept of free will is given. And that, in a way, psychopaths believe that they have free will without having to consider, it's not a choice. They don't consider what the impact on other people. So their definition of free will is different than most of ours.
Yes.
Not going to say it.
So we didn't get to the next topic that I want to look at. So if you have a chance and you have the handouts, so this is a little bit longer. It's not super long, but I'd like us to look at the Kabbalistic story of creation. So Tikkun in Lurianic Kabbalah. You've got
not yet.
You've got almost done. We've got just a few pages here. It looks longer than it really is because there's the pictures and it's big print. But if you get a minute to read that in advance, that'll save us the time of having to read the whole thing together. And what's fascinating about this is that this is the Kabbalistic story about how the world came into being, the story of creation. And it very much parallels the Big Bang Theory that is now accepted science. So we're going to see how the 16th century Kabbalists really anticipated a lot of what we understand now as the Big Bang Theory. So with that, thank you all for joining us.
One quick
Thank you.
Final comment, is that Barry Singer?
Yeah, just a request. That list of quotes that you pulled the Chandel quote out of, could you share that document if it's possible?
That you want my whole quotes document?
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
How long is it? How big is it?
That's my personal collection of meaningful quotes. Started, Barry, when I was 17 years old in a little notebook. I can share it. I can share it with you. I'm afraid that Felix is gonna have a complete psychoanalysis of my
I don't have the time, Rabbi. Please don't worry.
But Rabbi, if you could share the Swindell quote, that would be great.
Yes.
Barry, don't worry. I have that. I actually found that and copied it into my notes, so I can actually just send that.
Just
okay, thank you.
Truth in advertising. Obviously, I adapted it. His comment was, "It can change a church, not a synagogue." That was
right. Yeah, well.
that was my adaptation. But I'll send everybody the Swindell quote. And Barry, if you want the whole quotes document, knock yourself out.
Well, I saw the one or two above it when you were showing that on screen. And it was like, oh, this looks very interesting.
Yeah. So when
Also,
I
also
literally started that collection at the age of 17, and I'm now 64. So I've been at it for a while, and there's probably maybe under 500. So you can see I'm pretty discerning. Something has to really impact me.
When are you writing the book?
Make it into that document.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And
Anyway.
is it in chronological order?
We'll buy it.
It is in chronological order. So you'll see the very first one was an early feminist quote about. I think the first one is that since we can't. I don't know. It was some feminist thing that was the very first one that motivated me to say I got to remember this.
Wasn't there some story of you seeing a billboard in Brooklyn that really got you started?
That's another conversation. It's 47.
Oh.
It was driving by the chaplain school on the Belt Parkway that motivated me to be interested in the Army chaplaincy. That may be.
Oh, okay.
Say shalom b'romav.
Yeah, say shalom.
Amen.
If you're not on the distro list and you want to be, drop me a note. And
thank you.
I have to check. There may not be religious school next week. I'm going to send out the whole calendar for the year.
Okay.
Oh, great.
Shalom.
Nice to see everyone. Shavua Tov, Shana
Shavua
Tova.
Tov.
And Steve Haas, did you already check out? Steve?
No, I'm up.
Have a good rest between now and your next
Something in the chat
obligation.
I gotta look at here. So, Steve, you wrote the creation story in 1:6, that the water is separated so it is above and below the expanse. Didn't understand why water both above and below heaven. So the water.
That was the only place I saw that reference in that manner.
Yeah, 1:6. The waters above. Let there be a firmament in the midst of waters, and let it divide the waters, and divide waters which were above the firmament. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's like the clouds, the rain.
Yes,
clouds.
yes. Where the rain comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
If I can point out, in the desert, the water also comes up from the ground in springs and dry washes where you can find water. So you find water coming up from below, and you find waters coming down from above.
And you can find it on the surface.
All right.
And I can get some in my kitchen. I'll see you later.
And you can't find any if you live in Phoenix.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank
All
you.
right, see you later.